Yeah, good morning, everybody, once again, and welcome to another episode of PLA with myself, Bruno Simao from Bruno Simao Attorneys, and Nick from SSLR. Sorry. So today we're dealing with sort of two-part, three-part questions. A lot of it dives a little bit into criminal conduct on premises and what that then gives rises to in terms of lease agreements, landlords, and estate agents. So with more specifics, we will deal with the first question. And this one specifically states that, so a client then approaches us and that to state that, hey, there's a tenant that is doing will embark on criminal conduct on the property, and they actually producing crystal meth for themselves and to use for themselves on the property. And obviously the landlord then became aware of this, and they obviously did not take a liking to this. And then the question then I think surrounding that is, can then the landlord then do something about that, whether it's using the lease agreement to sort of bring this up and say, hey, I'm canceling the lease, or the remedy surrounding that to sort of do away with the criminal conduct and hopefully maybe even get the terminated and get the tenant out. Bruno, please just shed some light then with regards to this.
Cool. So look, my feeling on this is, number one, you need to look at the lease agreement and you need to look at the applicable legislation. So Nick and I were having a chat about this. The actual conducting criminal activity on a property isn't in itself anything specified in any piece of legislation that could result in it being a breach. But I think that if you consider the lease agreement and the purpose of the lease agreement, you can tie in to say that if a person's conducting some sort of criminal activity on a property, that the lease agreement, that goes against the basis or the purpose of the lease agreement, it would certainly be a breach. And I think this is the conversation over to what extent, does this act, or how bad is this act? Yeah, so Nick, give me some of your thoughts. I know that you had a couple of things in mind.
Look, I couldn't agree more, and it's one of those things that I think is always important. We always say, make sure you've got a good lease agreement in place. This is one of those things that, for the most part, on any good lease agreement that I see, is dealt with. You look at your TPN lease agreement, there's going to be a provision there that says if there's illegal activity on a particular premises, it's a breach of the lease agreement. That would make life very easy. You'd simply cancel the lease agreement, give tenants notice to vacate the premises, they'd get out. So absolutely no problem there. Again, it's one of those healthy reminders that you really should have, a good, strong lease agreement in place to deal with situations like this.
Yeah.
But in the absence of a lease agreement, I think you're right. So obviously, I think the major concern for the landlord is what kind of liability are they going to experience on the tenant's behalf, because the tenant is now performing these illegal activities. Illegal activities on a particular premises are a wide array of things. So I want to try and keep the conversation as high as possible, because this is a specific circumstance, but certainly there are a number of things that can happen on a leased premises which would fall foul of the law. And each one of them is really, going to have a different sort of weight. And I'll tell you from a property practitioner perspective, these are our favorite cases, because I can't tell you all of the weird things that we've seen on properties. But something like this, I agree, Bruno. Really, even if in the absence of a lease agreement, or if there is a written lease agreement and the lease doesn't really say anything about criminal activities, it would really depend on what exactly is happening on the particular property.
Yeah.
And does the breach go to the root of the contract itself?
Sure.
So it violates the very nature of the relationship between the parties, i.e., I'm a landlord, I'm letting you my premises for a residential purpose or whatever the case is, and you are a tenant, you need to look after my place and basically reside there and pay me rental. If the actions or the conduct of the tenant are so foul that it really goes to the root of the agreement, and it's a problem. It's a difficult argument. It's not as clean as, my lease agreement says this, therefore you're in breach. It might be something that's a bit more complicated than that, but it can still be done. And I think as long as you really get to the root of that, the contract, and it violates that basic contract that's entered into between the parties, I think you could take action. But you're certainly right. It's nothing that's specifically provided for within legislation for it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just thinking of a couple of examples as you were speaking. So, for example, it was the meth conversation. So, the actual process of it, could be, it's a fire hazard. It's obviously criminal, but it's also a fire hazard, and it's not the sort of thing that you should be allowed to be doing on residential premises. But interestingly enough, the person accepting a bag of stolen money, would that go to the root of the contract? So it's an interesting one. What criminal activity would actually deal with the lease agreement in itself and be a breach of the lease agreement? But what then comes to mind is also the question, and I've seen this a lot with landlords and tenants. If you performed criminal conduct, a lot of landlords then jump in and say, well, I've seen you, I've caught you in the act or whatever, I'm laying criminal charges unless, or I've laid criminal charges, but if you move out the property, because now the landlord's done. If you move out the property, I'll withdraw the charges. And this is, like as lawyers, when we studied, we always learned that mixing the two, having criminal conduct and civil liabilities, and trying to mix them up and having one subject to the other is actually a big no-no, and the courts do not like it. So that's also a big warning to landlords to say, listen, don't do that, because if you go to the police station a month later and you lay this criminal charge, the police is going to put pressure on you, and they're going to ask, why did you take so long? And you can't go tell them, oh, well, I was using it as leverage. So be very, very careful on that leverage conversation.
Yeah. And you got to be really careful. I mean, obviously, you as a citizen, there's a civic duty to report, criminal activities, and you go ahead and do that. In the circumstances, so that we can, address the problem. But you need to be very careful about when you're using information to get someone to do or not to do something in terms of a contract, because obviously this now falls into the realm of duress. So you are duressing someone to perform or not perform in terms of a particular contract. Now, duress is one of the ways in which a contract can be set aside or enforced in the circumstances. So someone can go to court and say, look, I didn't actually agree to whatever this, this particular action was. I was forced to do so by virtue of the conduct of the other party. So in circumstances, it's much easier in the opposite direction. If someone is forced to sign a contract, by threat or whatever the case is, they can approach a court and say to the court, look, court, I didn't agree to this contract. I had to sign at the time because I was being forced to do so.
Sure.
And a court will set aside that particular contract without a problem, because there was actually no meeting of the minds of the parties. There was a forced hand in a particular deal. So you need to be very careful about stuff like that. I agree with Bruno. I would stay away from anything that feels like you're extorting a result. Probably isn't where you want to be in this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I suppose it becomes very gray because people don't see it that way. They kind of see it as an extension of a civil claim, right? So I will sue you for rear rent, I will sue you for eviction, and I will lay criminal charges. So I suppose we as South African citizens, or whatever, global citizens, we kind of go, well, the criminal law is there to protect us. So in the same arm or same breath, I'm going to make a threat that I can do A, B, and C. This just happens to be E, right? And unfortunately, it's not like that. People don't understand that. So criminal law, criminal sanctions is a state thing. The state has been aggrieved. The state will go after this person on your behalf based on your complaint, but for the protection of everyone. It's, you know, and there's different principles on what punishment actually entails. You know, like, you know, the concept of sending someone to jail, what is the purpose? Is rehabilitation the right way? There's this huge science behind it, but it's got actually nothing to do with you specifically. It's got to do with society as a whole. Interestingly enough, just going back on something that I said, going to a police station, laying a criminal charge a month later, the police will ask, there are valid reasons why you would do that. So don't now go, oh, you know, now I have to do it on the spot. Some people do feel scared. Some people, especially with some aggressive tenants, and if you live on the property and they're threatening and all of this, and they do something wrong, you manage to get them to agree to move out, but you don't want to like kind of rock that boat. Obviously, that is a decent, proper explanation for it. So don't, don't think that you can't go later. You just need to have a good reason for going later.
100%.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you very much, guys. So once again, as much as all lease agreements are, people believe that they're very generic, but it is quite important that you actually, if you do take a good look at your lease agreement, consult a lawyer, so that they can review it for you before signing it, so that you don't find yourself later not being able to actually exercise some important rights. And then obviously, as Bruno mentioned, the utilization of criminal threat and sanctions being used, one has to be very careful about that.